Hi, I'm Calder, and I wish to God I hadn't come home that night. I thought I was surprising my wife and her father after a long business trip. Instead, I stood in the hallway, frozen, listening to the man I once called family calmly plan how to erase me from his legacy, like I was a problem, not a person. And my wife? She didn't say a word. Not to stop him, not to defend me. She just let it happen. What I heard that night didn't just break me, it rewired me. Now their entire empire is cracking, and they're the ones on their knees, begging through tears. But the truth? This story didn't start with betrayal. It started with silence. After a long business trip, I decided to come home and visit my father-in-law without telling anyone. But I accidentally overheard him planning to get rid of me to protect his $66 million fortune. And my wife stayed silent, quietly agreeing. What I heard him say about me shattered me. What happened next made their entire family fall to their knees, begging through tears. I left the airport just before dusk, that hour when Houston light turns soft and the air sits heavy on your shoulders. My trip to Denver had run longer than I planned, and I was worn down in a way I felt in my bones. Still, the quiet in my rental car felt good. After a week of tight schedules and back-to-back meetings, I just wanted a moment where no one needed anything from me. I hadn't told Leora I'd caught an earlier flight. I figured surprising her later might bring a smile out of her, the real one she used to have when we were younger. On my way home, I remembered her father was recovering from a quick procedure. It wasn't serious, but he wasn't the type who handled discomfort well. I'd promised myself I'd check on him, so instead of heading straight to our place, I steered toward the hospital. Traffic moved slow near the medical center, the kind of steady crawl you get when the day is ending and everyone wants to be anywhere else. I found parking on the second level, grabbed my bag, and walked toward the main entrance. The air conditioning inside hit hard. A receptionist looked up with a polite smile and pointed me toward the recovery wing after I asked about Garrick. I thanked her and headed down the long hallway. The place was unusually quiet for early evening. No Walden family chatter, no cluster of cousins leaning on the wall with coffee cups, no nurses trying to squeeze past them. Their absence struck me, though I shrugged it off. Maybe they'd stepped out for dinner. Garrick liked attention, so the idea of him alone in a recovery ward felt strange. I kept walking until I reached the junction near the consultation rooms. As I passed one of the conference rooms, I caught the low murmur of voices. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but a familiar tone slid through the door, the clipped, confident rhythm Garrick used whenever he talked business. Another voice chimed in, one of his brothers. Their words weren't clear, just the cadence of men who thought they ran the universe. I slowed down. Something in the air felt wrong. I didn't know whether to knock, announce I was back, or just keep moving. I didn't want to intrude. But then I heard my name, not misheard, not imagined. My full name, and everything inside me stopped. I took a step toward the half-closed door, careful not to let it move. Their words sharpened the closer I leaned, each one slipping out clean without effort. "He can't stay in the long-term picture," Garrick said. "It's too risky. We need to think 10 years down the line, not babysit someone who's never going to carry weight." Someone else let out a soft breath. "You're talking about a man who married into your family." "Yes, and," Garrick replied, each word clipped. "The estate is valued at $66 million. I'm not handing stewardship to someone who doesn't have the spine for it. He's polite, reliable maybe, but not sharp enough. Not the type you trust with legacy money." The floor felt unsteady. I'd been judged by him before. Small remarks, backhanded compliments. But this was different. This was a conversation about erasing me from their future, like I'd been a temporary inconvenience. Then, the blow I didn't expect came from the softest place. A quieter voice. One I knew almost better than my own. Leora. She wasn't speaking, but her silence rang clear as a bell. I knew her tone when she agreed with something. The little hum she let out when she didn't want to sound too eager. She had just made it. A tiny agreement. Enough for the room. Enough for me. My chest tightened. I couldn't move for a moment. It felt like everything I believed about my marriage had tilted sideways. He was never supposed to stay, Garrick added. We gave him room out of courtesy. That's enough. I stepped back carefully, not trusting my legs. The hallway swam slightly as I tried to breathe. I couldn't walk into that room. Not after hearing my wife sit quietly while her father discussed how to cut me out of their lives like some kind of liability. I turned away and made my way down the hall, slow and deliberate, as if any sudden motion would shatter what was left of me. The automatic doors at the exit opened, letting in the warm outside air. I kept walking until I reached my car, though I barely remembered crossing the lot. The skies were dim now, the last bit of daylight fading. Sitting behind the wheel, I tried to piece together what I just heard, but nothing landed. Every thought slipped away before I could hold it. All I felt was a deep, bruising ache, not just from Garrick's words, but from Leora's silence. That quiet agreement cut deeper than anything her father said. I didn't start the engine. I didn't trust myself to. I just sat there, palms on the steering wheel, realizing the ground beneath my life had shifted in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I didn't start the car. I just sat there, watching the orange glow of a distant traffic light reflect off my windshield. The sky had gone completely dark, but I hadn't even noticed the sun slipping away. My hands were still on the wheel, but I wasn't gripping it anymore, just resting there, like I was waiting for the world to move first. After a while, I turned the ignition, more from muscle memory than decision. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove around the quieter streets of Houston, taking turns without thinking, letting the silence inside the car fill the space where my mind used to be. Midtown was calm this time of night. Just the occasional pair of headlights passing me, a few neon signs buzzing dimly above empty sidewalks. I passed by a closed cafe we used to go to, Leora and I, back when things felt simpler. I pulled over, parked, and just sat there. The words from that hospital room kept replaying in my head like a broken track. Garrick's voice was calm, confident, like a man discussing stock options, not someone's life, not my life. He was never supposed to stay. That line, it cut the deepest. I couldn't even tell if it was the sentence itself or how easily it left his mouth. Like I'd been nothing but a temporary placeholder, a footnote in their legacy, and Leora. Her silence rang louder than anything said. I didn't even know what I'd say to her if I called. How do you ask your wife why she sat in a room while her father planned to wipe you out of the family and said nothing? Was it fear? Loyalty? Agreement? I let my head fall back against the seat. Maybe I should have seen it coming. I'd always been the odd one out, not born into wealth, not raised on trust funds and weekend trips to Aspen. I married in, worked hard, stayed respectful. I thought that was enough, but maybe it never was. After a while, I looked at my phone. No missed calls, no texts. She still didn't know I was back. A part of me wanted to keep it that way, just for a little longer. to protect whatever strength I still had left. I drove home slowly, watching shadows stretch across driveways and porches. The streets felt foreign, familiar, but not welcoming. When I pulled into our driveway, the porch light was off. A small thing, but it hit differently tonight. I stepped inside quietly. The house was still. No music, no clinking dishes, no laughter or voices from the den. Just silence. I moved toward the kitchen. A small stack of mail sat on the counter. Bills, catalogs, a few magazines. Neatly sorted, like always. But one envelope caught my eye. It had been addressed to me, but my name had been scratched out with a firm stroke of black ink. Over it, someone had written "household" in rushed handwriting. That didn't sit right. I opened it carefully, pulling out a folded packet. A Walden Group family event itinerary. The annual fall retreat Garrick hosted at his lake estate. It was fancy every year, over the top, meant to keep up appearances and stroke egos. I flipped through the pages, then I saw it. A full family listing, spouses included. Leora listed. Her sister and brother-in-law listed. Her cousins, their spouses, their kids, all listed. Then I reached her name again, and beside it, not me, just a line that said, "Partner, TBD, pending." My heart paused. I flipped through again, thinking maybe it was a formatting error. Maybe they just missed it once. But no. Every page, every seating chart, every schedule, I was nowhere, not even in the "also attending" section. Pending. They were already phasing me out, officially. That wasn't an offhand comment in a hospital. This had been in the works. Quietly, strategically. I sank into the kitchen chair, still holding the papers, hands numb. All the energy I had left seemed to seep into the tile beneath my feet. I wasn't angry. Not yet. It was something else, like I was watching my own life from the outside, realizing too late that I'd been slowly erased while smiling through dinners and family photos. A placeholder. That's what I was. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A neighbor's porch light clicked off. The world kept moving like nothing had happened. But inside this house, something cracked. I used to believe being kind was enough. That showing up, doing right, being steady, those things meant you'd be accepted, maybe even loved. But now, sitting there, I realized they'd never really let me in. And Leora, had she ever really fought for me? I wasn't sure what frightened me more, what I already knew or what I hadn't discovered yet. I wasn't sure what frightened me more, what I already knew or what I hadn't uncovered yet. That thought followed me into sleep, like a shadow I couldn't outrun. When dawn finally pushed through the blinds, it didn't bring clarity. It only made everything more visible. I woke earlier than I usually do, not because I was rested, but because something in the house felt off. A shift so slight most people wouldn't notice, but I did. After last night, I noticed everything. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake Leora beside me. She was turned away, curled into the blanket, breathing steady. For a moment, I watched the rise and fall of her shoulders, remembering when that sight used to calm me. Now, it only raised more questions. I eased out of bed, moved down the hallway, and stepped into the kitchen. The envelope from last night was still there on the counter, right where I'd left it. It hadn't been moved or touched, like a quiet reminder that I hadn't imagined any of it. My name crossed out, a replacement title written over it, pages where I simply didn't exist. Why erase me unless the plan had already begun? That question stayed with me as I picked up the envelope again, turning it over in my hands. The morning light made the black slash across my name look even harsher. I set it back down and let my eyes move across the room. Little things felt wrong. My mail stacked separately. Leora's laptop left open on the dining table. Something she never did. Papers had been rearranged slightly, just enough to tell me she'd been sorting through something late last night. And not with the relaxed rhythm she usually had. More like she'd been pacing emotionally, tidying to quiet her nerves. A quiet distance had settled in the house, stretching between us even though no words had been exchanged. I opened the fridge without really thinking, closed it again, then rubbed my hands together, trying to ground myself. Part of me wanted to confront her. Another part wasn't ready. Not yet. I reached for my phone on the counter, turning it on to distract my mind. A notification blinked at the top. A voicemail I hadn't seen before. I frowned. The timestamp was from the night I was flying home. I pressed play. Called her. "It's me. Listen, you need to pay attention. Something's happening and you weren't supposed to know. Call me when you land." The voice shook. A family friend. Someone who worked closely with Garrick. A person who wouldn't usually reach out unless something felt urgent. But what stunned me wasn't the message. It was the fact that it was marked as read. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't even known it was there. Someone had accessed my notifications. Someone inside this house. I let the phone rest against the counter, breath steadying but my mind tightening like a knot. If they were already watching what I received, how much further had things gone? Footsteps behind me interrupted the spiral. I turned as Leora walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, hair pulled loosely over one shoulder. She gave me a small smile, soft, practiced. "Morning," she said, voice even, too even. "Morning," I answered, studying her face. She moved around the kitchen, gathering a mug, filling it with coffee, not once looking at the envelope on the counter. Not once mentioning the hospital. Not once acting like anything unusual had happened the day before. "You're up early," she added, glancing in my direction for a second before looking away. Could she really pretend that everything was normal? After sitting in that room last night, listening to her father make plans around erasing me, I waited for her to say something. Anything. A hint, an apology, even a slip of guilt. Nothing. Her silence hit harder than the words I overheard at the hospital. As she turned away, another memory surfaced without warning. Sharp. Uninvited. Me at 9 years old, standing in a hallway at my aunt's house, overhearing grown adults talk about me like I wasn't there. He's a burden. Don't expect much from him. He'll never amount to anything. I remember holding my breath so they wouldn't hear me breathing. I remember thinking, even then, that I was more of an inconvenience than a child. Garrick's words last night. He was never supposed to stay. Lined up perfectly with that old wound. The same dismissal, the same cold certainty, like my worth had always been negotiable to someone. I gripped the back of the kitchen chair to steady myself. This wasn't just about money, or status, or paperwork. This was a pattern. People deciding my value without ever asking who I actually was. And now my wife was part of it, or at least aligned with it through silence. Leora turned and asked, "You want some coffee?" Like nothing weighed between us. "No, I'm good," I said quietly. I wasn't avoiding a conversation. I was realizing I needed more than a confrontation fueled by emotion. I needed truth, proof. Something undeniable. Because whatever this was, it went deeper than she'd admit if I asked her now. I watched her leave the kitchen and felt something shift inside me. A direction forming. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending the house isn't on fire. Whatever happened next, I couldn't move blindly anymore. But before I could gather the truth, someone else made a move I never saw coming. It started on my way back from picking up a replacement charger for Leora's laptop, a minor errand, something I would have ignored on any other day. I was halfway home, taking the long route through the quieter side streets of our neighborhood, when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I normally let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something about this one, a gut instinct, made me answer. Calder Hence? The voice on the other end was clipped, male, professional, but there was a flicker of hesitation underneath. This is Adam Sternwell. I'm with Sternwell & Co. I represent Garrick Walden on several estate matters. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. I've never spoken with you before. No, sir, you haven't. And technically, I'm not supposed to be speaking with you now, but I felt obligated. That word set something off in me. He continued, his voice lowering. You should know that your father-in-law submitted revisions involving family assets. Your name was brought up, directly. I blinked. What kind of revisions? There was a pause. I heard papers rustling, a keyboard tapping. Then Sternwell said, I'll send you something. It's unofficial, off the record, but I think you should see it. It'll come as a secured attachment. The call ended just as I pulled into a small parking lot behind a shuttered bookstore, hands slick against the steering wheel. Within moments, a new email hit my inbox with a password-protected PDF. I typed in the code the attorney had texted separately and waited. The title popped up on screen, Succession and Protective Allocation, Phase 2. I scanned the opening paragraphs. My stomach sank. It detailed a structured plan for succession within the Walden family, should certain individuals become incapacitated, absent, or removed. That last word wasn't bolded in the document, but it might as well have been written in blood. Leora and Garrick were listed as sole decision makers. I, Calder Hence, was mentioned only as a conditional party, someone whose involvement would cease under vague eventualities. I scrolled further, pulse in my ears. A yellow highlighted note from Sternwell had been added at the bottom. You were not supposed to see this. Be cautious. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. There was no mention of wrongdoing on my part. No just cause. Just quiet, formal removal from something I had helped build. By marriage, by time, by trust. I sat back, my breath fogging the windshield. A small breeze passed through the cracked window, but I didn't feel it. They'd been planning this. And not just recently. The document was dated 3 weeks before my business trip to Denver, meaning this wasn't about something I did. This was always going to happen. I drove home slower than usual. Every stop sign felt longer. Every red light stretched out like a warning. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same. Perfect siding, trimmed lawn, porch light on, even in daylight. But stepping through the door felt different now, like entering a theater set instead of a home. Leora called from the kitchen without looking up. You were gone a while. Everything okay? Her tone was casual, maybe too casual. She was stirring something on the stove, back turned, hair tied loosely. She didn't ask where I'd been, didn't even glance at my face. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Yeah, I said, ran into some traffic. My phone buzzed again. I didn't check it right away, but I saw her glance at the screen. Just for a moment. Quick. Sharp. Then she went back to stirring, lips pressed together too tightly for someone making soup. I excused myself, said I had to check an invoice in my office. Once inside, I shut the door and sat at the desk. The second email from Sternwell had arrived. Another attachment. This time, it wasn't estate planning. It was a household financial breakdown. A summary of joint assets between Leora and me, drawn up by an internal analyst from Garrick's firm. Only, the numbers weren't right. Every contribution I had made, my salary, my investments, the down payment on the house, was listed under spousal support gifts. My name wasn't tied to any of it legally, not in this draft. Instead, a section at the end was labeled Contingency Plan, Dissolution Preparation, filed under Leora Walden Hentz, drafted March 18th, nearly 6 months ago, before we'd had that quiet weekend in Austin, before our anniversary dinner, before I'd poured every dollar into renovating the guest wing for her visiting relatives. I clicked through the pages, stunned. There were tables and tabs calculating net worth impact post-divorce. I wasn't being written out of a family. I was being phased out of a life. This wasn't Garrick's work alone. Leora had been part of this from the beginning. I leaned back, exhaling through my nose, letting the betrayal settle like dust across my chest. I wasn't shocked anymore, just cold. She had smiled across from me at dinners, held my hand in church, laughed at my bad jokes, all while these papers were being drafted. These were contingency plans, but only for one of us. I heard her footsteps in the hallway. She paused outside my door, maybe listening, maybe just passing. I didn't move. I didn't want her to know I knew. Not yet. Reacting now would only make me a variable they couldn't control, and they had already planned for that. So I saved the documents under a new encrypted file, backed them up to a drive I kept hidden in the garage, then shut down my laptop. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, our wedding day. I barely recognized the faces in it now. One of us had been honest, and it wasn't her. I thought I had seen the worst of it until I discovered what they were doing behind my back that very same night. It was just after 2 a.m. when I woke to a faint sound outside the bedroom. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to cut through the stillness and pull me from sleep. At first, I figured it was the old vent settling again, or maybe the ice machine from the fridge. Then I heard a voice, low, careful, a whisper. Leora's. I sat up without thinking, instinct prickling under my skin. She wasn't in bed. The hall light was off, but something told me she was standing just beyond the door. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could and moved closer. Her voice came again, barely audible. He won't fight anything. He never does. That's why Dad says now is the time. I froze. My heart thudded once, then went completely still. I leaned closer, ear nearly against the door. He'll sign whatever we give him, she said. He still believes loyalty matters. That's why it'll work. She wasn't upset, wasn't conflicted. She was calm, steady, certain. Each word was like someone peeling back the last of the curtain I'd been clinging to. And behind it wasn't just deception, it was calculation, design. I backed away, slowly, quietly, like someone retreating from a ledge after realizing how high up they'd climbed in the dark. By the time she came back into the room 5 minutes later, phone tucked neatly into her robe pocket, I was back in bed, eyes closed, breath even. She slipped in beside me without a word, not knowing the man she was lying next to had finally heard her for the first time. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table nursing coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes before I touched it. Sunlight streamed through the windows like nothing had changed. The smell of toast wafted through the air. Leora was humming. She floated around the kitchen like she had no idea what I knew. She asked about my schedule, if I needed anything from the store, if I wanted her to pick up more of that almond milk I liked. She didn't look at me when she asked. Every time her phone lit up on the counter, she flipped it over without reading the screen. Her smile was timed, her tone soft, but I'd learned enough about masks to know when one was being worn too tightly. "You okay?" she asked, pouring herself coffee. "You look a little pale." "Didn't sleep much," I said. She nodded like it meant nothing. As she walked past me to grab a dish towel, I heard her say something under her breath. Barely a whisper again, but this time I caught it. "He'll blame himself anyway." The spoon slipped out of my hand and clattered against the table. She didn't react, just kept wiping the counter like she hadn't said anything at all. But I heard it. She knew I would. Maybe part of her wanted me to. That's when something inside me cracked. Not loud, not violent. Just a quiet break in the foundation of everything I thought we'd built. Something that couldn't be undone with words or tears or even truth. I stayed at the table long after she left for the gym. Didn't clean up. Didn't move. I stared at the back door, then the window, then my own hands. My thoughts ran like static in my ears. No beginning or end, just white noise. Had this always been the plan? All those nights I worked overtime to help Garrick secure a real estate project, was I just a tool in their pipeline? Was I brought in because I was loyal, quiet, easy to keep in line? Did they mistake my trust for ignorance? At some point, I stood up, walked into the bedroom, and opened the closet. I pulled down the old canvas duffel I used to take on camping trips back before life became boardrooms and family obligations. I set it on the bed and opened the zipper. I started placing clothes inside, shirts, socks, a shaving kit. It was robotic, more like watching myself from above than actually doing it. Then I sat down on the floor, and I stayed there, hands on my knees, eyes staring at nothing. I didn't cry. That would have been easier. I just stopped. I whispered, "What did I miss all these years?" Like it might echo back an answer. It didn't. About an hour later, I heard the water running in the shower down the hall. Leora was back. I hadn't even heard the door. I stood up slowly, still a little dazed, and stepped into the hallway. I remembered I needed to find a receipt from her desk, the one for the contractor who'd repaired our patio lights. I figured it was a small excuse to ground myself, something normal, something boring. Her small home office was quiet. The laptop sat open, lid halfway closed, screen dark. I reached for the drawer, but something tugged at me. I tapped the spacebar. The screen lit up for a moment before locking. But just before it did, a folder flashed across the desktop. It was only there for a second, but it was enough. Exit Strategy, Phase 3. That title hit me harder than anything she'd ever said. Harder than Garrick's hospital words. Harder than being erased from legal documents. This wasn't just Garrick's plan. This wasn't just a family maneuver. This was hers. She'd mapped it out, and from the sound of it, she was well past planning. I closed the laptop softly, slowly. I didn't touch anything else. That was the moment it stopped being heartbreak. That was the moment it became war. I wasn't going to leave. Not yet. They wanted quiet. I could be quiet. But I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to hand them the win. They wanted a man who wouldn't fight. They'd forgotten the part of me that had learned to survive without them long before they ever welcomed me in. I thought I had hit my lowest point until I learned what they were preparing to do to me next. That morning, I parked down the street from our house, not ready to go back inside. The walls in there whispered too much. I sat in the car with my laptop open on the passenger seat, reviewing the documents I'd copied from Leora's computer, fingers tight around a travel mug that had long gone cold. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me hesitated. I answered, keeping quiet. "Garrick," the man on the other end said, voice clipped and confident. "Just confirming we're greenlit for the Thursday timeline. Legal's prepping the behavioral affidavit, and we'll have the incident staged by end of week. Should be enough to secure asset separation." I didn't say a word. He went on, unaware. Calder won't see it coming. His behavioral pattern fits. Quiet, cooperative. You'll have room to press the family clause once that part's documented. I slowly leaned forward, letting the weight of it settle. Staged. Behavioral affidavit. Family clause. And then, before the man could say more, I ended the call. My hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. Not entirely. The room I'd been pacing in mentally, the one full of doubt and what-ifs, just got flooded with light. They weren't just trying to sideline me. They were preparing to paint me as unstable. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel. The voice on that call hadn't hesitated. No cryptic language, no code. He'd believed I was Garrick. He was reporting in. That meant this wasn't just a shady family scheme. This was a machine, and they were already flipping the switches. I checked the time. If I drove now, I could make it to Garrick's downtown office before noon. I needed to look that machine in the eye. By the time I pulled into the parking structure beneath Garrick's building, my mind was laser-focused. I walked through the main doors, not fast, not nervous, just deliberate. The lobby was marble and silence. Polished brass trim, abstract art on the walls, soft classical music in the background. All of it calculated, sterile, designed to make people feel small. As I stepped toward the elevators, 2 security guards peeled off from behind the reception desk and approached me. "Sir," one of them said, holding up a hand, "we're going to have to ask you to leave." I stopped. "On what grounds?" "There's been a report you were acting erratically in the lobby," the other added. "We're going to recommend you get some help." Help. That word was a hammer dressed as concern. The receptionist, a woman who once smiled at me every Christmas, was suddenly busy not making eye contact. A man in a suit walked by, glanced, and kept walking, but not before I caught the wrinkle in his brow. Whispers started behind me. I took a slow breath. They were expecting a reaction, something loud, something messy. Instead, I asked, "Do you have that report in writing?" Both guards looked at each other. "We don't share internal—" "Then you have nothing," I said calmly. I turned and walked out. No drama, no yelling, not their script. I sat in my car again, this time outside a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Still downtown, but with enough distance to think. They had tried to humiliate me publicly, quietly enough to avoid headlines, but visible enough to plant seeds of doubt. And I realized then, it had probably started weeks ago. A delayed callback from a client. A strange look from a mutual friend. The way my last team meeting felt stiff, like I'd said something wrong without knowing it. They were eroding my reputation before I'd even caught on. I stared at the traffic moving past the windshield and reminded myself, no more emotional moves. Everything from here had to be precise. I went back to the folder I'd saved. Their documents weren't clean. Garrick and Leora might have counted on me not looking closely, but I was looking now. One signature looked duplicated. Another date didn't line up with my flight log. A bank transfer was referenced in a clause, an account I'd never opened. I highlighted each inconsistency, saved my notes. They'd gotten sloppy. Sloppy because they thought I wouldn't check. That was their mistake. I drove to a nearby cafe. Not for coffee, I wasn't hungry or thirsty, but because the parking lot had shade, and the signal was strong enough to upload large files. I opened my laptop, connected to a secure VPN, and began sending everything I had to an encrypted cloud backup. I didn't know how far they'd go, but I knew what I was up against now. I wasn't fighting confusion anymore. I was fighting intention. And if they were going to come at me with legal angles and paper trails, I needed to build my own. After securing the documents, I searched for a name I hadn't dialed in years. Walt Kinney. An old contact. Quiet. Trusted. Lawyer for people who didn't want to be seen talking to lawyers. I didn't ask him to take my case. I just asked questions. Subtle ones. About property laws. Asset tracing. Power of attorney loopholes. Walt listened. He didn't ask why I was asking, but he understood the stakes by the end of the call. "You're not crazy," he said. "You're smart to start now." I closed the call and sat back in my seat, watching a couple argue over their parking meter across the lot. It was strange how quickly the world could shift under you, and how little the world noticed when it did. I muttered to myself, voice low, steady. They're not going to like who I become next. And for the first time in weeks, I meant it. But while I was preparing to defend myself, Garrick and Leora launched a strike I never saw coming. It was Sunday, gray skies, cold breeze, the kind of day that feels like it's holding its breath. I just stepped outside to get the mail when my phone buzzed. A text from Leora. "Dad wants us all to have dinner together tonight. He says it's important." Just like that. No explanation, no context, not even a smiley face to soften the blow. After everything that had unfolded the past week, the sudden warmth in that invitation felt like a setup. I stared at the message for a full minute. If I declined, they could twist that too. Say I was being difficult, uncooperative, unpredictable. I could already hear Garrick's voice. He didn't even have the decency to show up. So I texted back one word. Okay. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing, not with anything dramatic, just mentally reinforcing the wall I'd need to keep up. By 6:30 p.m., I was pulling up to Garrick's estate. The place looked the same. Manicured hedges, pristine lighting, a driveway that felt like it belonged in a political campaign ad. But something was off before I even stepped out of the car. Too quiet. Too perfect. Inside, I was met with hollow smiles. Garrick's second wife, Marion, greeted me with a little too much cheer in her voice. "Oh, Calder, we were just talking about you. Come in, come in." Leora stood near the fireplace. She gave me a quick smile, touched my arm softly. "Glad you came." I wanted to ask her how much of tonight she'd helped orchestrate. Instead, I just nodded. Dinner was set in the private dining room. Oval table, 6 seats, candles flickering like stage lights. Leora sat to my right. Garrick, at the head, held court as usual. He talked about market trends, a new consultant he was considering hiring, how Marion had picked up painting again. "And let's not forget," he said at one point, raising his glass. "Big changes are coming for the family, the kind that define legacies." My fork paused midair. I didn't respond. I just kept eating. Bite, chew, swallow. Leora's hand brushed mine again. Light, casual, like we were just another married couple making small talk after church. But she never looked me in the eye. Halfway through the meal, the tone shifted. Garrick put his fork down with theatrical care, dabbed his mouth with a cloth napkin, and cleared his throat like a man about to deliver a eulogy. "I think it's time we talked openly about something that's been on my mind," he said. "About Calder." The room stilled. He leaned back, fingers steepled. "You've seemed off lately. Not yourself. And I've had concerns, particularly for Leora's safety." I looked up slowly, keeping my expression blank. Marion looked down at her plate. Leora played with her water glass. "You've always worked hard," Garrick continued, "but maybe it's all catching up to you. The stress, the pressure, long trips, late nights. We're just worried, son." Son. That word tasted rotten, coming from him. I said nothing. More murmurs followed, soft, rehearsed sounds of concern from across the table. Cousin Emily chimed in about how I seemed distant at the last family gathering. Garrick nodded, piling on. I realized then, this wasn't a dinner. This was a deposition, a trap. I set my utensils down, calmly, and met Garrick's eyes. "Could you explain what exactly I've done to make you say that?" I asked, voice low. He blinked, thrown off for a second. "Well, I mean, there's a pattern. Erratic moods, forgetfulness. You raised your voice at dinner a few weeks ago." "That was it?" Leora suddenly spoke. You yelled at me last week, Calder. You scared me." Her voice cracked, like it had been practiced in front of a mirror. Her hand brushed her collarbone, another rehearsed touch. I turned to her, met her gaze. She looked away. Still, I didn't react. That silence made them uncomfortable. Garrick reached down beside him and pulled out a folder, manila, thick. He opened it and spread a few printed emails across the table. "These," he said, "are the kinds of messages you've been sending. They're aggressive, threatening." I scanned the pages. Sloppy forgeries, wrong phrasing, typos I would never make, sent from a domain I hadn't used in years, timestamps during meetings I could prove I'd been in. Still, the performance around the table continued. I picked up one page, glanced over it slowly, then looked back at Garrick. "May I take a picture of these?" I asked, calm as ever. "For my records." He wasn't expecting that. His mouth tightened. "That won't be necessary. But you just shared them publicly. I'd like to make sure they're accurate. For context." That wasn't in his script. He stared at me for a second too long before pushing the folder aside. The conversation moved in circles after that. Garrick shifted tones, offering help, suggesting therapy, hinting I could step away from business stress for a while. Every sentence was a shove cloaked in silk. Finally, I stood. I looked around the table. "I appreciate everyone's concern," I said. "We should continue this discussion when all the facts are present." I pushed in my chair. No sudden movements, no anger, just control. And I walked out. Past the hallway of portraits Garrick had hung of himself. Past the entry where Marion's perfume still hung in the air. Out into the night. They thought that dinner would break me. But they had no idea what I had prepared for the endgame. By the time I stepped into Bram Lattimore's law office on Monday morning, the city was just waking up. The streets were quiet, the sky painted in overcast gray. I'd barely slept the night before, but my mind had never been clearer. Bram's office was tucked inside a brick building near Montrose. Nothing flashy, no gold nameplate, no high-rise view, just a solid oak door, clean floors, and a man who looked like he'd seen enough family drama to write his own legal thriller. I placed the envelope on his desk, thick, heavy. Every page was a nail in the coffin they'd built for me. He pulled out the contents one by one. First, printed emails. Those forged messages Garrick flaunted in front of the family. Then, photocopies of the exit strategy folder Leora had saved under her name. Next, a digital timestamp log showing my location during several of the emails, complete with boarding passes and company flight manifests. And finally, the voicemail, the one they never meant for me to hear. Bram didn't speak for a while. He just scanned the evidence, brow slowly rising. When he finally looked up, he didn't smile. He just said, "You're not crazy. They're sloppy, and you've got them." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the first time in weeks I didn't feel like I was drowning. Bram laid out the plan with the precision of a man who'd done this dance before. No outbursts, no threats. Don't accuse anyone, not yet. We wait. Then we present. Once, clean, controlled. They won't know where the punch came from. I nodded. Apologies, I didn't care for them anymore. They'd tried to erase me from my own life. I wasn't here for forgiveness. I was here for truth. That afternoon, I was halfway through a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed again. A text from Garrick. Family meeting, 6 p.m., mandatory. Mandatory. I actually laughed out loud. They still thought they were pulling the strings. Still thought I was the same man who sat quietly through ambush after ambush, taking hits without swinging back. I texted back, "I'll be there." At 5:55 p.m., I pulled into the circular driveway of Garrick's estate. Inside, the conference room smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive disappointment. Everyone was already seated. Garrick sat at the head, as usual. Leora to his left, her sister and brother across from them. A financial advisor I recognized, James Stafford, sharp as a tack, always wearing a blue tie. I took my seat without a word. Garrick leaned forward, palms folded like he was addressing a boardroom. "Calder," he began, "this is not about exclusion. It's about protection, for the family and for you. Your recent instability has raised concerns. We need to decide on the next steps." I looked around the room, every face waiting for me to break. I folded my hands, mirroring Garrick's posture. "Then, let's discuss facts." Predictably, Garrick reached under the table and pulled out the same manila folder. "Here are more messages," he said. "Proof that you've been erratic, aggressive." "Would you mind passing them down?" I interrupted. He hesitated. I didn't break eye contact. He slid the folder over. I opened it slowly, scanned the pages, then pulled a matching set from my briefcase. Same messages, side by side, with metadata printed beneath. I held them up. These were allegedly sent while I was 35,000 feet in the air, flying to a client site in Denver. The airline confirmed I had no internet access during the flight. The timestamps don't lie. Stafford leaned forward, squinting. I turned to page 2. "Here, we have a document supposedly signed by me, yet the signature is a copy-paste from a 2020 contract. You can see the digital overlay if you zoom in." Stafford's face began to change. Garrick's didn't. He was still banking on performance over truth. I laid down the final sheet. A recording from last week, a call intended for Garrick that accidentally came to me. I pressed play. The voice echoed across the room. "He won't fight anything. That's why Dad says now is the time." Everyone froze. Stafford turned to Garrick. "This is felony-level fraud." Silence. A different kind of silence. The kind that shifts gravity. I turned to Leora. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I kept my voice steady. "When did I stop being your husband and become your strategy?" She started crying. Not loud, not sobs of remorse, tears of exposure. She looked at Garrick, then at her brother. "I didn't want to do it," she whispered. "I only did what I was told." Stafford stepped back slightly. Her sister blinked, expression hardening. I leaned in. "You had choices, Leora. Every lie you told, you made with your own voice." She didn't answer. Then came the final moment. I pulled out a signed document. Bram's, filed with the court just hours earlier. Protective motions are in place. Any attempt to retaliate from this point forward through slander, manipulation, legal pressure will make all of this public, including your financial misconduct. Garrick's face went pale. "You wouldn't," he muttered. I tilted my head. "I already did." He sank back in his chair like someone had punched him in the chest, and for the first time in this entire mess, I wasn't the one defending myself. They were. No shouting, no threats, just the truth, laid bare. I stood up, nodded once, and walked toward the door. Behind me, chairs creaked, papers shuffled, and the family that once tried to bury me sat in stunned silence. As I walked out of that house, I thought the war was over. But the real ending came the next morning, when the whole family knelt in front of me, begging through tears. The sky was still pale when I stepped outside. The air had that early morning stillness, like the world hadn't quite decided to wake up yet. I'd gotten up to grab the paper and check the mailbox, something grounding after the storm of the night before. But when I turned the corner at the edge of my porch, I stopped cold. They were there. All of them. At the foot of my driveway stood Garrick, Leora, her sister, and even her brother, who hadn't said a word to me in months. They looked out of place, like people who had wandered into someone else's life by accident, disheveled, eyes red, clothes rumpled like they hadn't slept, or maybe they hadn't wanted to. Garrick stepped forward, stiff at first. Then, almost without warning, he dropped to one knee. A second later, the other. He bowed his head. "I'm begging you," he said, voice cracking. "Please, don't let this go public." The man who once ruled every conversation, who never backed down from a threat, was now barely able to look me in the eye. It wasn't arrogance anymore. It wasn't performance. It was fear. Leora followed. She collapsed more than knelt, tears already streaking her cheeks. Her mascara had bled into the corners of her eyes, giving her the hollow look of someone worn down by their own choices. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she sobbed. "I didn't know what else to do. He said we'd lose everything. I just thought I was protecting what we built." She reached toward me, but I didn't move. What struck me wasn't her desperation. It was the words she chose. She never said, "I loved you." Never. I was wrong. Only, I didn't want to lose everything. Even now, even kneeling in the cold morning air, she was still trying to frame it as self-preservation. She'd never seen me as a husband. Just a shield, a resource, a name to inherit. That truth settled in my chest, not like fire this time, but like ice. I stood there for a long moment, not to enjoy their pain. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace, clarity. "I'm not going to press charges," I said quietly. "I'm not going to destroy you." Relief flashed across Garrick's face, too fast, too greedy. "But I'm done. I won't be dragged back into this family, not as a scapegoat, not as a convenience, and sure as hell not as a pawn. Whatever happens next, that's on you." Leora tried to stand. Her knees wobbled. "Please, Calder, just talk to me. We can fix this." I turned and walked away. Behind me, Garrick whispered something I couldn't quite hear. Leora called out again. I didn't stop. The porch creaked beneath my weight as I stepped back inside, and gently closed the door. My kitchen was quiet. The same wooden table where I once slumped over in shame now felt lighter, like the house itself had taken a deep breath. The morning sun streamed through the window, painting soft amber lines across the tile. I poured a cup of coffee, set it down, then opened my laptop. There was no hesitation this time. Click by click, I began submitting the necessary documents: formal separation paperwork, estate disassociation, financial disentanglement. It was like untangling years of knots, one thread at a time. Not out of bitterness, not to punish, just to finish. Sometime after, I walked into my bedroom and stood in front of the closet. It took a moment to reach for the top shelf. My hand hovered before I pulled down the old black duffel bag. I remembered it clearly. It was the same bag I'd packed during the worst night of this entire ordeal. The night I almost left without a word, without a plan. I had shoved clothes into it blindly, half zipped it in panic, then left it forgotten on that shelf when I convinced myself to stay and endure. I pulled it down now. It still had the same wrinkled shirts, the half-folded pair of jeans, a toothbrush with a cracked handle. But I didn't feel the same man who had packed it. This time, I repacked it slowly, folded each shirt with care, chose what mattered, left behind what didn't. I zipped it closed fully. A clean, final sound. By early afternoon, I was in my truck. The duffel sat on the passenger seat. The windows were rolled down. There was no one chasing me, no one waiting at the edge of the driveway to block my way. Just me. I didn't know exactly where I was going. Maybe a cabin up by Lake Livingston. Maybe Austin for a few days of quiet. Maybe just down the highway until I saw a sign that felt like peace. But I knew one thing for certain. For the first time in a long, long while, I had chosen me. Not survival, not strategy, just myself. And for the first time in years, that was enough.